Well, good afternoon. This is Ryan Watts with the Kentucky Oil and Gas Association, and thank you for joining us for our second installment of the KOGA's Summer Webinar Series brought to you by CountryMark and Ergon. We have today a change in our schedule. We were originally scheduled to have the Kentucky Secretary of State Michael Adams to join us today to discuss the Kentucky primary election, which is next Tuesday. So if you haven't already gotten out to vote, please remember that next Tuesday is the primary election day in the state of Kentucky. But we are joined today with Warren Martin, and we're going to get to his presentation in just a second. He's a very accomplished speaker, one of the top speakers in the United States. But before we do that, we want to thank our sponsors, CountryMark and Ergon, who I previously mentioned. And the other ones that we want to mention are Cumberland Valley Resources. I named them last time, so I want to make sure that I name them first. AquaClear, Bingham, Greenball, and Dahl, Bitco Insurance Companies, Blackridge Resource Partners, Britannia, CountryMark, Diversified Gas and Oil, InLink Midstream, Ergon, Hughes Land, Phil Brown Insurance, Reliance Well Service, Steptoe and Johnson, and Wyatt Terror Co. So thank you so much for your sponsorship and continued support. Next week, our webinar series will feature the Kentucky Division of Oil and Gas Director Dennis Hatfield with an update and progress on what's happening in the state of Kentucky and just kind of the activity that has transpired since the coronavirus hit in early March. So that's what we have to look forward to next year, and I hope you will be able to tune in for that. Just a couple of housekeeping things. Make sure you keep your webinar on mute. I think it's already muted, but for some case that accidentally turns off, just make sure you mute your line. We have a question and answer feature on there, so at any time during the presentation, make sure that you ask your questions, and we'll have those answered at the very, very end. There is a survey which will appear afterwards. So if you have any issues or glitches or any of that type of thing, please let us know and let us know how we're doing. All this information that you're seeing online, if you miss it in today's presentation, will be on our website at www.kyoilgas.org, and it's right on the homepage as part of the Summer Series program. Now, and one last thing I'd like to mention is we have advertised our online vendors. We're having some connectivity issues there, so what we're going to do is just put those vendor spots online. So if you would like to see the ones by CountryMark and the other ones by Phil Brown Insurance. So take a look at those and make sure you patronize our sponsors. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our featured speaker. And first of all, we just want to thank Warren for jumping in at the 11th hour, the last minute to fill in. We really appreciate you jumping on here. Warren currently serves as the executive director of the Kansas Strong for the promotion of the quality and life created by the oil and gas industry. So if I can't do his total biography a complete justice here, so I highly suggest you go online and read his entire biography. He is a Texas Tech graduate, and he worked for General Tommy Franks, who led the invasion in Afghanistan back in 2001. Which I met Tommy Franks, and he is a very humble and very unassuming guy. So a very, very proud moment there. So Warren, thank you so much again, and I'll turn it over to you to be the wordsmith in today's presentation.
Well, thank you, Ryan. Appreciate the introduction. It's an honor to be with you here today. I'm really excited about the opportunity to speak with you guys. And where I want to start is I want to start with a story from Aesop's Fables. One of my favorite fables of all time is the fable of the hare and the field mice. And it's one of my favorite stories of all time. One day the hare is walking down the rabbit trail, going about his business, doing what he does, walking towards the goals that he has in life. And along beside the path is the field. And out in the field is the field mouse. And the field mouse looks at the hare and says, you know what, I'm going to put that hare in his place. I'm tired of him walking around so proud, and I'm going to put him in his place. So he goes over to the hare and he says, Hare, I want to challenge you to the race. And the hare looks down at the little field mouse, looks at his little legs and thinks to himself, there's no way that this field mouse could ever beat me. I'll be happy to race you. And I'll race you anytime that you want. And the field mouse says, well, before we race, let's both go home, have a meal, and then we'll come back this afternoon and we'll meet here at the field and we'll race. Well, the hare agrees to this. So they both go home, they eat their meal, they come back later that afternoon, and they come back to the field and they line up to race. Well, the field mouse says, okay, what we'll do is we'll race down these rows. And in between each row of the field was a furrow. So the field mouse got down into one, the rabbit got down into the other. They couldn't see each other over the furrow. And so the rabbit said, you go ahead and start the race. And so the field mouse said, okay, 3, 2, 1, and off. And they take off running. And they run down the road and they run, and the rabbit runs, and he's running just as fast as he possibly can. He doesn't only want to win, he wants to blow this field mouse away. So he runs down the row as fast as he possibly can, and right before he gets to the end, he hears a little voice on the other side say, I'm here already. Well, he's beside himself. How in the world did this field mouse with these little bitty legs beat him in this race? So he comes across and he says, we have got to race again. There's no way that you can beat me. We've got to race again. So the field mouse says, I'll race you as many times as you want. They get back down in the rows with the furrow in between them, and the field mouse calls out, 3, 2, 1, and off. And they run back down to the other end of the field. The rabbit's running twice as hard as he ran last time. He's putting everything he's got into it. And right before he gets to the end of the row, he hears a little voice on the other side say, I'm here already. Well, now he's just really beside himself. What in the world can he do? How in the world is he ever going to win this race? So he says, we must race again. And the field mouse says, I'll race you as many times as you want. And so they race back down, and then they race again, and they race again. And after numerous times of racing, the field mouse asks him if he wants to give up, and the hare, his pride won't let him. And he says, there's no way that I'm going to give up. We must race one more time. So they get down into the rows, and the field mouse calls off, 3, 2, 1, and off. And they take off running. And at the other end of the row, the field mouse waits, and he waits, and he waits, and the rabbit never shows up. So he gets up and he walks over the furrow and he looks down the next row, and sure enough, about halfway down the road, there's the rabbit. So he walks down to where the rabbit is and looks at him, and he looks dead. And then he kicks him a few times, and he seems to be dead. So he kicks him again, and sure enough, he's dead. And so then the field mouse calls off to the other end of the row and says, okay, brother, now you can come out. Because who could ever tell the difference between two field mice? I love that story because it talks about a story of someone who was going about their business, following their own path, doing what they were supposed to be doing, and then getting distracted through their pride and getting into an argument, getting into a race, getting into a job, getting into a position that they should have never been in the first place, and running themselves to death trying to outrun something that they can never win. In the oil and gas industry, we have a job, and that is to provide cheap, reliable energy to the people who need it most in the world. That is our job. That is what we do, and it has fundamentally revolutionized the world. It has fundamentally revolutionized our society by providing cheap, reliable energy and by providing the raw materials in order for us to accomplish and build and create the world that we live in. And right now, we're in crisis. And I'm sure you're here feeling that impact. You're feeling that crisis, and it's so easy in that crisis for us to step off the path that we're on and to get caught up in a race that we were never meant to be in. Kentucky has a long history in the oil and gas. In fact, longer than most other states in the United States. You go back to 1815 in the brine well at Monticello that was drilled and eventually filled up with oil and was abandoned. 1818, the Holling and Zimmerman well that was drilled, and then the Great American Oil Well of 1829, and I could go on and on and on. And Kentucky has a tremendous history that goes into the oil and gas lineage and hall of fame. Currently, Kentucky exceeds overall 793 million barrels. In totality, 6.9 trillion cubic feet of gas. And most importantly, over recent years in Kentucky, both the oil and the gas production have greatly increased. That is a good thing. That is a positive thing. And then COVID hits. Then the crisis hits. And no doubt the crisis has impacted both oil and natural gas there in Kentucky. But it's impacted it in two ways, not just by the price, but by the price and by the level of consumption. It's not just COVID-19. This started way back in December when Russia and Saudi Arabia started meeting and trying to manipulate the oil market, and got into an argument that spun quickly out of control that devastated the oil price at the same time that COVID hit and consumption drops off. And we had a perfect storm that really impacted our overall industry. But the reality is the greatest danger, in my opinion, the greatest danger to our industry is neither COVID-19 nor what happened with Saudi Arabia and Russia in the oil price. Those are devastating, but that's not the greatest danger. To me, the greatest danger is a number of people that are trying to utilize this crisis in a way to fundamentally change the oil and gas industry, to fundamentally change the energy industry, to fundamentally change the debate that we are having, trying to get us off the path that we're on and into a field and a race that we can't win. And it's going to impact this debate, this conversation is going to impact everything from the producers in the field to the two refineries that you have there in Kentucky. I believe you have two refineries there in Kentucky, to the consumption of petrol products by the consumer. It's going to impact every single aspect. But there's good news. The EIA, Energy Information Administration, still predicts that by the year 2040, energy will increase by 28%. And of that energy increase that will take place between now and 2040, the increase that will be needed to handle consumption, it will increase by 28%. 56% of that will come from oil and natural gas. That's good news. That's good news for you. It's good news for me. It's good news for your state. It's good news for our country. Why? Because cheap, reliable energy is the key to us continuing to move forward as a society. But there are many of those efforts, what I was talking about before, and how people are trying to fundamentally change that. And you can specifically see that in the number of reports that are beginning to come out that are correlating with the oil and gas industry, that are beginning to talk about how peak demand will happen in 2030. That peak demand will happen in 2030 based on what's happening in the current crisis. And they have transformed their reports to include that data, which now their reports are showing that peak demand will happen in 2030. But the EIA predicts that oil and gas will continue to increase. But the key there is the 2030 date is a utilization tool to change the conversation about our energy. It's important as we begin looking forward that we don't get distracted from the race that we are meant to be running and get caught racing the field mice in arguments and in paths that are not going to move us forward. It's important that we stay the course, that we provide the most valuable and most mobile energy resource on this planet. The energy resource that is so versatile that can be shipped anywhere in the world. The energy resource that is so cheap and reliable that it's able to raise up communities out of poverty and give them a new hope and a new future. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But there's no doubt that what we're going through in this crisis has definitively impacted our industry. In fact, this is the third price collapse that we have experienced in the past 12 years. But this one is different, not because it's just a price collapse, but because it's a price collapse compounded by a reduction in consumption. It's hit a transformation. It's hit a industry here in the oil and gas industry that was already in the midst of transformation, and it is accelerating that transformation. What do I mean by transformation? We were, before all of this happened, we were already in a industry that was transforming. We were in an industry that was filled with intense competition, that was filled with technology-led rapid supply response that could respond to the production levels that were needed, to changes in consumption that were already occurring in our societies, to investor skepticism about the future of the oil and gas industry, and also by investor speculation, as you see some smaller companies begin doing almost crowdfunding in some ways through social media sites in order to drill wells and those types of things. So our industry was already transforming, and you add to that, we were already in a transformative industry because of the intense increasing public and government pressure, especially with issues that are related to environment and climate change in the industry. And so all of those things through this and through the efforts of other people are increasing at a very rapid rate. All of those issues that I just mentioned are increasing. The transformation that is taking place is increasing. And so what we have to remember, though, is that this is not the first time. This is not the first time that we in the industry have faced a crisis. And it's not the first time that we have an opportunity to be an answer to the crisis. In fact, if you go back and you look historically, oil has always led. Oil led in World War I, the first mechanized war. In fact, here in Kansas, we're pretty proud to say that in one county here in Kansas, in Butler County, after the hit of Stapleton number 1, 9% of the world's oil was produced in one county here in Kansas. But it wasn't just us alone. All across the United States, oil production began to expand greatly during World War I and following World War I, which led into the Roaring 20s. We led during World War II. And we led in the automobile age that followed World War II. We led leading up to the tech bubble, the technology increase that took place because a lot of oil and gas companies were investing in technology companies as an attempt to diversify their holdings. Oil has always led. But not only have we always led, we've also been through a number of crises. We've been through wars. We've been through depressions. We've been through recessions. We've been through international pressures on the outside, and we've been through tremendous environmental concerns. In fact, the oil and natural gas industry, on the environmental front, the oil and natural gas industry has done more than any other industry in the world to address environmental concerns. Our industry has spent more than the federal government here in America, has spent more than the federal government, and has spent more than almost all other industries combined to address environmental concerns. We are no stranger to crises, and we are no stranger to rising to the occasion to overcome and to accomplish them. And the bright spot for us is need. Our country needs us. Our country needs the resources that we provide. The bright spot for us is how we respond to the needs of people. In fact, the number one killer in the world today is poverty. Poverty is the number one killer. And over, it's documented around the world that the way that you raise people up out of poverty is by providing cheap, reliable energy. Let me give you an example. An example of that comes from, for those of you who are my age or older, you probably remember back in the 1980s. Now, 1983 to 1985, we had the Ethiopian famine. There's a devastating famine that took place in Ethiopia. And in Ethiopia, about 1.2 million people died. Over 400,000 people were in refugee status and had relocated away from their homes trying to find aid. It was a devastating event. It's when the We Are the World campaign took place to raise money for the famine that was taking place in Ethiopia. Now, what you probably don't know or probably don't remember is the fact that in 2016, Ethiopia had the worst famine in recorded history for that nation. The worst famine in recorded history for that nation. But you didn't really see it on the news. You didn't hear about it. There was no We Are the World campaign 2 that took place. Why? Because the deaths and the refugee situation didn't take place. What was interesting is that a lot of the people who worked in the 1980s 1980s famine wanted to understand why there was not the same impact of the worst famine in history in 2016. And so they went back to Ethiopia and they began analyzing what had changed from 1983 and 85 to the 2016. What they found was everything that has to do with oil and natural gas. The number of paved roads increased by over 75%. To over 75% of the nation. The main arteries had increased over 75%. They had bought thousands and thousands of Toyota trucks and had brought them into the country. They had put filling stations in throughout the country. They had put in water movement systems for both for irrigation and for drinking to get water supplies to small villages. And more than 80% of the population was accessible by roads. That was very contradictory to what it was in the 1980s. They found that they were able to get medicine to people faster, and there was better medicine that was available. They were able to get resources around the country, and the consequence is that there was no major death toll that took place in the 2016 famine. There was no major relocation of people. Why? Because cheap, reliable energy and the products that are being produced by the oil and gas industry enabled Ethiopia to rise to the point where the worst famine in their history did not devastate them. That's what our industry does. It's what our industry does here in the United States and your life every single day. And most of the time, we don't even know it. How do I know we are going to come out of COVID and be okay? Because our needs haven't changed. America's needs haven't changed. We still need cheap, reliable energy. We still need the resources that are being produced by the oil and gas industry because it's those resources that enable us to live the way we live. It's those resources that have enabled America to become the greatest nation on earth. Cheap, reliable energy raises people out of poverty, especially right now, natural gas and its ability to transport and its cheapness and its ability to impact people's lives. I know out there in Kentucky, y'all's electricity is primarily generated by coal, I believe, and then supplemented by hydro. Here in Kansas, we have a great number of wind turbines that are throughout the state. And there's a huge push as this effort in response to COVID is to try and redefine the energy sector. There's a huge push to try and redefine it in such a way that we push more towards what most people call alternative sources of energy. I don't call them alternative sources of energy. I call them additional sources of energy because wind and solar are not alternatives. It's not like you go put a wind farm in and then you shut down a natural gas plant or shut down a coal plant. In fact, most of the time, what happens is you put in 2 or 3 wind farms and you leave the coal plant running. And so what happens is when the wind stops blowing, the coal plant must turn up its production. And when the wind starts blowing, the coal plant must idle down its production. And so when you're not providing an alternative, you're providing an additional energy production centers, and you're paying full value for both the coal and the wind. And that's what we're seeing happen. In fact, every single state that gets more than 5% of its overall energy from wind or solar, the electricity rates in those states have skyrocketed. Here in Kansas, we get about 36% of our electricity from wind turbines, 36%. And over the recent few years, our electricity rates have increased by over 25% by bringing on those new wind farms throughout the state. It is not an alternative to provide cheap, reliable energy. What is oil and natural gas. And we have a bright future because we are cheap, we are reliable, and we provide the raw materials to provide for the life, to provide for the way of life that we live every single day. This crisis will, of course, change our industry. It'll change our industry in some dynamic way. There's a lot of reports that are out right now about bankruptcies, about consolidations, about those types of things. In fact, a lot of the national oil companies, they will be going through a streamlining process to try and eliminate assets that are not producing well, focus in on the assets that are producing well. You're going to have small companies, and those small companies, some of them will go out of business, and we're going to have a filtering of some of those companies that are going to go out of business. And there's going to be some consolidation that takes place between those companies and a lot of those companies. But in all of that, the silver lining is there's also opportunities that are going to come with that. We're going to have national oil companies that are more efficient on the other side of this. And because they are eliminating some of their less productive sites, it opens up opportunities for smaller companies and independents to come in and gain valuable new resources to add to their portfolio. For a nimble independent company, there's going to be opportunities as some of these larger companies begin to siphon off some of those lower producing sites. There are opportunities in every aspect of it. The key is finding those opportunities and how to capitalize on those opportunities. One bright area in the oil and gas industry, beyond any shadow of a doubt, is petrochemicals. Petrochemicals is an extremely bright concept for the future of the oil and gas industry. Petrochemicals are utilized here in the United States. The oil and gas is used to produce over 6,000 raw materials that are utilized to produce the resources and the products that we depend on, millions of products that we depend on every single day. Everything from plastics to asphalt to fertilizers, all the way to medicines. It produces all of those things. And the fact is there's a bright future. Even the reports are saying there's a bright future in petrochemicals. But here's the key. The raw materials that are used to make the petrochemicals right now are greatly funded by the refining process and the money that goes into the refining process to be able to produce those raw materials. So the refining of the energy that comes from a barrel of oil is predominantly paying for the first refining of the raw materials that go into those petrochemicals. And so it is a great boon to all of us if the petrochemical industry continues to move forward. And definitely, I believe, as we begin to look at this crisis, we begin to look at what's going on, the fact is there are lessons to be learned. There are definitely lessons to be learned. There's lessons to be learned from every single crisis. First and foremost, I meant what I said at the beginning. The biggest danger that we face today, is the fact that there are elements, there are individuals, there are organizations that are trying to capitalize on this crisis in order to fundamentally change how people view the oil and natural gas industry here in the United States. From Congress all the way down to the kitchens of America, there are people who are trying to fundamentally change how we view the oil and gas industry. The number one lesson that we can learn right now from the protests that are happening all over the United States, right now from what's going on and how our elected officials talk to each other in Congress and through the media, the number one thing that we need to learn as an oil and gas industry is that if we're in this industry, we must be advocates for this industry. And I don't mean silent advocates. I mean advocates who are actively advocating for our industry. You see, the oil and gas industry has a long history when it comes to advocacy, and most of it is not very good. In fact, if you go back to the bigs, when there was nothing but big oil companies predominantly throughout the world, at that point in time, they took the approach that we are big enough and we are independent enough, and you are so dependent upon us that you can attack us all you want. We can remain silent and stay above the fray, and nothing will ever impact us. And so for a long part of our history, our industry has remained silent. And over time, the voice and throughout the community, the activist voices that are against us began to grow, began to develop, began to enter academia. And now, and when we're in this crisis right now, it's even taken to that next level, that we cannot no longer remain silent, and we can also no longer be in a position where we only answer when we're attacked, or we only answer when we're put into a situation where we have to answer. We must be outgoing advocates for the industry because we are vital to the future of America. And we must, in today's society, be an active voice within that society. It matters what other people are saying. Diversification alone doesn't always work. I know lots of oil companies that going into this crisis felt very comfortable because they had diversified their portfolio. I know we have a tremendous amount of independents here in Kansas. Some of them own gyms. Some of them own restaurants. Some of them own bars. They own different types of businesses as a means to diversify to gain a hedge of protection from the oil industry. What we found is diversification doesn't always work. In this case, because of what's going on in our society, they were hit not just in the oil industry, they were hit in the gyms, they were hit in the restaurants, they were hit, and there were very few elements of the business world that were not hit by this crisis. And so it's important that we as an industry realize that we can't just diversify and remain quiet. We have to care about what's going on outside of our industry and be an active voice in what's going on outside of our industry, because it matters what other people are saying. Education matters. Education matters greatly. Let me give you an example. Right now, there are two major conversations that are happening simultaneously. One is gas prices, and the other is meat prices. And the way that they are treated in the media, the way that they are talked about around the kitchen table, diverge greatly when they're actually pretty similar when it comes to how it's produced, how it's refined, and how it's sold to the consumer. And you have a lot of similarities between the two. So in the meat industry, we've heard a lot about the production side of it, and there's an oversupply in the production side, but they can't get it to market because they've hit the funnel of the processing plants. And in the funnel of the processing plants, because of COVID-19 and plant shutdowns and state shutdowns, the meat to consumer has hit a roadblock that has slowed it down. And what happens is the meat prices have begun to rise. And you have the government, you have other people that are looking into potential meat gouging claims that are being made. But a lot of what you see on social media is tremendous sympathy towards the ranchers and the farmers who have an abundance of product that they're trying to get to market, an oversupply of product right now based on what can actually get to market. And there's a tremendous amount of sympathy for them. Now take gas prices. The same scenario pretty much is set up, but there's not the social sympathy that exists at the same level for the oil and gas producer as there is for the rancher and the farmer. And a lot of that is because of misconception on what is and what goes into the price of a gallon of gas. There's no doubt right now to most consumers that the reason that they're paying a higher price of meat is because of what's happening in the packing plants, not what's happening on the farm. Yet if you go talk to most consumers, they will squarely blame the oil companies because of the price that is at the pump. When the price of oil went to nearly $40 below negative $40, there was a lot of articles that came out that estimated and questioned whether oil could go, or excuse me, whether gasoline could drop below $1 a gallon. And when it didn't drop below $1 a gallon, when that didn't happen, there was a lot of complaints about the money-grubbing oil companies. But if you actually break down the price of a gallon of gasoline, gasoline is unlike any other product really. There's very few others, but is unlike any other product really that's sold to the consumer, in that taxes that are applied on the product are not a percentage tax like a sales tax. They're not a percentage tax. They're a per gallon tax. A per gallon tax. So here in Kansas, we pay between state and state and federal taxes. We pay 43 cents per gallon for a gallon of gas. It doesn't matter what the price is. It's 43 cents per gallon. Back in the 1980s, when oil and gas companies got out of the filling station business because the margins had dropped off, you had a tremendous amount of independents that came in, competition increased, marketing and distribution increased because they were competing against each other. For a portion of the market. And what you saw is the marketing and distribution rates on a gallon of gasoline rose significantly. Today, and when gasoline's at $1.69 a gallon, about 46% of that price is the marketing and distribution. Refining accounts for about 3% of the price. So what happens is when you add all that together, the baseline for gasoline, before you put crude prices in it at all, is about $1.22 a gallon before you pay anything for the crude. In fact, when the price of gasoline goes up, crude prices is where the money is, where the money increases. When they go down, crude prices is where they decrease, and it's the producer that takes the cut when the gallon of gas drops. But there is not the same level of sympathy for the producer as there is for the farmer and rancher, even though both of them are providing essentially the same type of vital service to society. That's where we, as people in the industry, have to advocate. That's the number one thing that must change post-COVID, is we must become energy advocates within our own industry. We must advocate for the industry post-COVID. We must let people know about the medical supplies that we provided during this crisis. The fact that N95 masks, besides the metal clip that are on them, and I could argue that that's made from petroleum too, but besides the metal clip that's on an N95 mask, every single aspect of that mask is made from petrochemicals. Every single aspect, from the gloves, from the respirators, the ventilators that people are utilizing, from all of the technology that is being utilized within that medical facility to answer the concerns of people during this crisis. It was all dependent upon oil and natural gas. Of course, we talked about gas prices and how vital that is for distribution, for getting food to market, for getting resources cheaply into the hands of consumers. Energy products that we utilize to cook with, to heat our homes, and so on. Trucking and the dependence that trucking has upon our industry, distribution. In fact, here at Kansas Strong, we did an entire series of videos where we went in and as an effort to educate and say trucking is important, and it's not possible without oil and natural gas. Distribution is important, and it's not possible without oil and natural gas. Medical actions taken during this time are important, but it's not possible without oil and natural gas. And every one of us must become an advocate that is out there being a vocal spokesperson for our industry. That is the number one thing that we must learn in our society, because here's the reality. If we don't speak, the rest of the world will speak, and we probably won't like what they say. We probably won't like the ideas that they have for our industry. We must become vocal advocates that accurately educate people on the products and services and the resources that are available through our industry and because of our industry. I want to end by talking about how vital the Kentucky oil and natural gas industry is. The Kentucky oil and natural industry is vital. And I know you guys are going through a tough time, just like we are here in Kansas. It is tough going in the patch today. But I want to encourage you today. I wrote an article here about Kansas producers, and I've got to go to Kentucky earlier this year for the first time in my life. I drove around all over Kentucky, learning about it, looking around, meeting people. And I feel that what I wrote about Kansas oil and gas producers applies to Kentucky producers as well. I believe that Kentucky producers are sustainable and are going to be able to get over this hump and be stronger and leaner on the other side. Let me say stronger, leaner, and meaner on the other side in producing the resources that they're set out to produce. And I believe that for 5 reasons. Here in Kansas, the average oil company employs 3 employees. 3 employees. What does that mean? It means we're predominantly locally owned. And I know there in Kentucky, there's a lot of locally owned oil and gas producers. The people that work in the industry are mostly locals that are working within the industry. And here's what I know. is that you don't easily give up on your hometown. You don't easily give up on the town that you're living in. You don't easily walk away from the town that you're working in. Oil and gas producers are vital to our communities. They're there supporting the sports teams, supporting the social clubs, being present in the social clubs, being present in the community, and they are vital to those communities, and they won't easily quit those communities. The second reason I think that we're going to be stronger on the other side is because, excuse me, we are more than gasoline. We're more than gasoline and diesel and fuel. We provide over 6,000 raw materials that go into creating products every single day, as we've talked about already. Medical supplies, food, it's fertilizers, food production, fertilizer, the plastics that we use in our cars and our gadgets, the computer that you're watching me on right here, right now, is vital to our society, way beyond energy. And because of that, there is a sustainable market for us in the coming days ahead. Number three, this is not our first crisis. This is not our first crisis. We've been through wars, we've been through depressions, recessions, we've been through price bubbles, we've been through price booms, we've been through price busts, and we've endured through it all. Kentucky has a long history of oil and natural gas. And there in Kentucky, you're going to have to tap into the enduring spirit of that history to get through this crisis and continue to move forward. Why? Because, number four, Kentucky needs you. Kentucky needs you. They need the jobs you provide. They need the energy you provide. They need the resources you provide. You are a vital component to the economy of Kentucky, and Kentucky needs you to thrive. And five, quite simply, oil producers are a breed apart. Workers in the oil industry are a breed apart. The article that I took this from was called Kansas Oil, Down But Not Out. And it was all built around the idea of a boxing match. And the reality is the people who work in the oil and gas industry are enduring people that do not easily quit and do not easily throw in the towel. We are fighters. We are fighters that get up every day, that work hard to accomplish great things and provide a great product that greatly impacts people's lives. And that was a lot of greats because the industry is filled with a lot of greats. Great individuals doing great work. And I believe that many through this crisis had their eyes open somewhat to the reality that we're not easily going to flip the switch and jump onto renewable sources of energy like wind and solar. It's not going to happen overnight. That education has to continue. Why? Because as the IEA says, energy is going to continue growing, and it's going to increase by almost 28% by 2040, and over 56% of that will be being produced by oil and natural gas. We are not going anywhere. We have to get through this crisis, and when we do, we will be stronger, and we will continue to be there to provide the resources that people need to keep America the greatest nation on earth. We will be a provider of those resources. I want to thank you for inviting me and letting me come and talk. I appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate Ryan and Stacy and putting it together. And with that, I'll conclude. And if there are any questions, I would be happy to answer any questions or anything that I touched on but didn't cover. I'd be happy to follow that up as well.
Well, thank you so much for stepping in, and what a great presentation. And we do have some people who joined us that were going to join us from the Secretary of State's presentation from the Kentucky Coal Association as well. So it's kind of coupled in there too that fossil fuels are very important just from every perspective. My question to you, Warren, would be, the trade organizations, they do a great job of advocating for the industry. But what are the most effective ways to kind of break into the mainstream and kind of tell our message and get that message out there? We have put out op-eds, we've social media, but at the same time, the person with the loudest megaphone gets the most attention. So, what are some effective ways of communicating the necessity of our industry?
Yeah, I'll say two things. First, to the guys, the people that are on here from the coal industry, thank you for the work that you're doing. You're vital to America as well. You, again, provide another cheap, reliable source of energy. Didn't know you were on there, and I would have been happy to have included y'all more into the presentation because you are a vital part of that presentation. In fact, if you look at what's going on in China and what's going on in India and the leaps that they have made over the past decade, it's been predominantly driven by the fact that they put in more and more coal electricity generation plants than any of the other countries in the world. It's that cheap, reliable energy. That's what raises people up out of poverty. So appreciate the work that you're doing. I think going, Ryan, to the second part of that question and what's the most effective way, there's a lot of effective ways. You can do advertising campaigns. You can do social media campaigns. You can do op-eds. You can, and we all know these advertising things. But what people are looking for is they're looking for the magic bullet. They're looking for the magic bullet, and they want something they can put their money into, and that changes things. And that's not how it works. In fact, you want to know how it works? If you had your news on today, you saw that President Trump signed an executive order about police enforcement and changing certain aspects of police enforcement. Why did he sign that letter? Why executive order? He signed that executive order because there are thousands of people across the United States who are out in the streets that want some change, and he got them to change. That's what got them to change. And that's why, whatever efforts we take on in the oil and gas industry, whether it be TV commercials, whether it be sponsorships, whether it be op-eds, blogs, those are all important. Those things are all vital. They make a difference, but they will never make the difference that can be made when those people in the industry as a whole become advocates for the industry. The main thing that will change our communities, change the conversation, and change the education within our communities is us talking within our communities. And that's not a very comfortable thing, but I've seen on social media, people don't seem to have a hard time talking about anything. And yet when we come to our jobs in the oil and gas industry, a lot of times, I have people that I talk to here that are extremely supportive of the oil and gas industry, but they will not mention anything on social media. They won't mention anything in the conversation. And I think where the change really needs to happen is us as a industry beginning to understand that our silence will end up being our demise. That we have to be advocates that are engaged, from the CEO of a company all the way down to the pumper that's out there every day pumping out in the field and sees 3 people. We have to become advocates, which means that we have to educate ourselves about the industry in such a way that we can educate others about the industry and the vital role that we play. And I hope that answers your question, because all of those other things, if you hear an ad on TV, I'll just give you one quick example. If you hear an ad on TV, you may hit that ad. You might even think about that ad. But most of the time, an advertisement on TV doesn't hit you until you hear someone off of TV that mentions it. And so, I hear all kinds. I got 3 grandkids that are living with me right now. I hear all kinds of toy advertisements that are on TV. I don't pay attention to any of them. I see them, but I don't pay attention to any of them. But the ones that I remember are the ones that my grandkids then start singing the songs from, start singing the catchy tunes from, that start asking me if I can get it for them for Christmas. Then I remember what the tools are. The same is true in all advertising. The goal of advertising is not just to impress people, to break the thought and get them to think about something, but also to take it a step beyond that. Once you talk about it away from the ad, then it becomes a part of the conversation of your life. And that step is the most vital step, I believe, into the future of where we go as an industry.
Okay, and we are getting close to the hour, and I have one last question for you. And the question is, how is Kansas Strong enlisting industry, commercial oil and gas users to promote oil and gas? And do you all have any users who partner in that message?
Absolutely glad you asked the question. We have a social media platform that right now we just started it. Like I said, I'm learning from this crisis like everyone else. And when this crisis hit, we had a great advertising campaign. We had money that was going into sponsorships. And all of a sudden, when 85% of your funding disappears in a matter of weeks, you have to reevaluate how are we going to engage the public. And so what we did was we built, which we should have done a long time ago, and we're learning, and it's going to be a essential part of what we do going forward. We built a social media platform. Right now, we have over 50 energy advocates here in the state of Kansas. These are all people that are working in the energy industry that have voluntarily signed up to be energy advocates for us. And what it is they link their social media with our social media platform. It doesn't give us access to see anything on their social media. It doesn't give us access to post anything on their social media. It simply links their social media platform to our social media content. And then every time that we produce new content, it sends them an email and says, hey, great new content has been put out by Kansas Strong. Would you like to share it? And it's got one button on the bottom. And if you click yes, every account that you've linked to it, it'll share that content to every one of those social media accounts. That's a small step that we're taking to begin developing these energy advocates. And we're going to expand that by at the conferences, getting these energy advocates together to do instructional sessions that really talk to them about how to talk to others about energy, how to talk to their friends and family and their communities about energy. And so I think it starts in those two ways that we are starting it here. There are other ways, but those are the two ways that we're starting it here. And we are already seeing a huge impact from that. Our social media platform puts a dollar amount for every share, every like, and it figures up how much would it have cost us to be able to get that by paying through paid advertisement. And right now, our 50 advocates are providing to us about $1,500 to $2,000 in valued advertising every week by linking their accounts and sharing our content.
Well, thank you so much. If there's any last parting words that you'd like to say, catch a breath there, and we really appreciate you. Really appreciate you coming on. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we depart here?
I just want to say, I've been a part of nonprofits since I was 19 years old, and I'm here at Kansas Strong because I believe in what you guys do as an oil industry. I believe in it with all my heart. Why? I've worked in 28 countries around the world. 28 countries around the world. The number one thing that has been devastating to populations, that has prevented them from being able to live what we would call the American dream, is the fact that they do not have access to resources, especially cheap, reliable energy and the products that come from it. And so I'm a part of Kansas Strong because I believe in what you guys are doing. And I truly believe, not because my job depends on it, I believe because I believe in it, that you guys are vital to America getting back to work. And so I encourage you, keep up the good work, keep moving forward, get up and run, because America needs you.
Amen. With those, we really appreciate you jumping on, like I said, at the 11th hour and filling in. And normally we would have a group to applaud you. So again, we appreciate all of your commitment and all that Kansas Strong does. So thank you again, and we'll be in touch soon.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. And for all of those who are on, just remember next week is our next webinar that features the Division Director for Kentucky Division of Oil and Gas, Dennis Hatfield. So bring your questions to him, and he'll be talking about plugging abandoned wells, permitting questions if you have those, and some of the updated regulations that have passed. Again, thank you, and we will see you guys next week.
All right.
Thank you.